good evening. I'm Melisa, Idris.
And I'm Sharaad, Kuttan.
Welcome to Consider This, the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Let's begin with some good news, shall we? The number of COVID-19 recoveries today exceeded the number of new cases. Some 168 recoveries in the past 24 hours. That's compared to the 134 new COVID cases today. The total number of cases is currently at 4,817 cases, which is lower than JP Morgan's prediction that Malaysia would see a peak of 6,300 cases on April the 14th, which is tomorrow. So perhaps we're on the right track, according to the Ministry of Health. Now, in other news, the government has decided against allowing barbers, beauty salons and optometrists to operate during the rest of the MCO. Now, following last Friday's announcement, groups representing hairdressers had spoken out, saying that social distancing could not be maintained in a hair salon. According to Defence Minister Datuk Seri Ismail Sabri Yaakob, the Prime Minister had decided against allowing these services to operate during the MCO period, and this was after the government listened to the public, to experts and also to NGOs. Now, this is a responsive move, but could they have avoided all this by leaving barbers off the list in the first place, Sharaad?
Yes, perhaps if, they'd done the stakeholder consultation. We're not actually certain at this point in time how much stakeholder consultation there was. Clearly, when it comes to a lot of the SMEs, those in manufacturing, that they had made representations to the government, in the run-up to this new stage of the MCO and in sort of turning on the valves of the economy slowly back on. But it's not clear why barbers or beauty salons were included. What was interesting is that pushback was coming from those stakeholders themselves who thought they just could not, in fact, live up to the expectations of the public health concerns. Yeah, and
I think, it's understandable that perhaps policy making the time of COVID, we have to make allowances for, for perhaps U-turns or discrepancies in judgment. However, the idea is to include all of government into this. So not just, even though it's an economic decision, perhaps also including the Ministry of Health in the decisions, perhaps including other parts of government, also very important when it comes to policy making at this time.
Yeah, just, because these are extraordinary times, Melissa, and, getting a meeting together or putting a meeting together might not be as simple as it used to be, though a phone call, I guess, is...
Or a video call now, right?
As they say, really many stakeholders are just a phone call away. I think, of course, like you said, there must be room for government to tweak its decisions, and I'm not entirely sure whether it's fair to pounce on the government at this point in time for these kinds of turnarounds.
Right. Very quickly, let's turn our attention now to the recent appointments of politicians to head government agencies. Yesterday, past Secretary-General and de facto Law Minister Datuk Taqiyuddin Hassan said that all MPs who do not presently hold positions in government will be made head of GLCs. Now, PAS has 18 MPs. 8 are ministers and deputy ministers, and 1 has been made the Prime Minister's Special Envoy to the Middle East. Now, that leaves 9 more MPs. Will they all be made heads of GLCs? And is this seen as a system of rewarding MPs?
Yeah, Melissa, this news is in the kind of the background of the attention that's been given to the COVID crisis. Governance issues, perhaps not central to the focus. It was during the Pakatan Harapan time. Pakatan Harapan, of course, not exemplary in many ways. There were many instances where Pakatan itself didn't live up to its own standards. It didn't live up to its promises. But at that point in time, remember, there was something that they claimed to stand up for in terms of values, in terms of governance principles. So the issue is, have we turned back the clock so dramatically that we are returning to a system where that these positions are given out essentially as sinecures or as rewards rather than given to people for their competence.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's what former Minister Rafida Aziz is saying, that we're in fact in reverse gear, and G25 has called for the government to ensure that political appointees meet the fit and proper criteria to lead this GLC. So whether they are, in fact, the right people to lead these companies.
One argument, Melisa, that is being made is that the previous batch of crop were also political appointees. And so as a consequence, they should have stepped out. But perhaps that really isn't the issue. It's not about whether you're a political, non-political entity. Really, that is partly a process issue. Right. It's really about what the purpose of your appointment is. Is it because you're a better person to lead it? Was the previous person not competent? What is your agenda? And more importantly, are our institutions now reformed sufficiently that they have integrity, that they could, in fact, take on individuals with that concern about their background, but they, in fact, the institutions have the resilience,
are strong enough to withstand any kind of
anybody's attempt to subordinate those institutions for personal and political gain. Now, that is the real issue.
That's something that we're going to have to keep a close eye on. Now, we're going to take a quick break, but after this, we're going to speak to experts about being mentally prepared for the new normal of living with COVID-19. Stay tuned. Hello, if you've just joined us, you're watching Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris, with me, Sharaad Kuttan. Last week, the International Red Cross warned of rising suicides as a result of pressure and isolation. Now, it called for increased psychological support as part of the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. While providing mental health support may not necessarily be very high on the agenda as we continue to contain the virus, but it is still an important issue that impacts millions of people. Now, joining us on the line is R.D. Ayuh, Publicity Director for Befrienders KL, which offers emotional support to those who are distressed, feeling depressed or suicidal. R.D., good evening. Thank you for coming on the show tonight. Now, has Befrienders KL seen an increase in the number of calls during this MCO?
Thank you. So there was an increase during the first phase of MCO where during that time you still operate at our center in PJ with our usual hotlines. So the first 7 days see an increase of 13% in the number of calls. But what is alarming is the drastic increase in the number of calls related to COVID-19 and MCO. The first week was around 9%, and by second week it went up to 14%. And in the month of April so far, calls relating to COVID-19 and MCO has increased to up to 38%. So it seems that the longer it goes, there's more and more people who are finding it difficult to cope.
Could you tell us, RD, exactly what is it that they talk to you about? I mean, what are they concerned about? What would they like changed about their situation? Where's the stress coming from in terms of the MCO?
All right, okay. So the biggest challenge has always been on the mental health issues. Being in isolation increases the fear and hopelessness that they feel. And this can also lead to anxiety and depression. Apart from that, when someone is being isolated in a crowded family or space, the environment can also get toxic. So in some instances, there were reported cases of physical and even sexual abuse. And then there's also financial issues, those who can't earn because of MCO, and those who are running businesses who can't run but still have overhead to cover. So those are mainly the issues.
Well, can I ask, who's calling in? Do you know, I mean, in terms of a breakdown of what kind of demographic we're looking at, where they are? Is this predominantly urban areas that are calling in that have reached out to Befrienders? Do you know who's calling in?
We don't really know, but it's from the urban area.
Okay, and Ayuh, what exactly do you advise your healthcare professionals who are, taking these calls? What do they say to people who are feeling despondent, or they're in toxic relationships, or they're concerned about the future of their business? What exactly could you say to them that will reassure them?
Okay, so it's actually really important to, first of all, to listen to them non-judgmentally, because that's what we do. We provide emotional support to them. So by providing them this safe space where they can ventilate and talk about whatever that's on their mind, it actually helps in a sense, because you have to remember, when they are in isolation, they can't go out to meet their friends or family or other family members or even counselors. So reaching out to someone who can actually empathize with their situation can actually help.
All right. And, you mentioned a bit earlier, RD, that these are the people who are finding it very difficult to cope in this period of MCO. I'm wondering about, how people can help. So how people in family members living at home, or perhaps neighbors or friends, can reach out to help.
Okay, I think it all comes down to kindness, because we need a lot of kindness in tough situation like this, because even one small act of kindness can make a huge difference to people who are suffering throughout this difficult period of time.
Are you concerned that perhaps there's a significant portion of the community that's not reaching out for help, RD?
Oh, yeah, for sure, definitely. We are actually very concerned, because as I've mentioned, help is available, but like, for example, for Befrienders KL, we have changed the way that we are reachable, because we have changed our number, and also we are also reachable through Skype nowadays. But unfortunately, because it's the short period of time to actually advertise the number, it takes time. So we don't get that many calls as we used to get compared to when we were running our hotline. So I believe there are a lot of people out there who are still clueless about where to seek help.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. And thank you for speaking with us, and also for the good work that you're doing. If you are feeling distressed or anxiety, please reach out to the Befrienders KL. They are just a quick Google search away for the new number. Now, we're going to continue this conversation, but joining us on the line now, we have Chan Wen Lee, Assistant Professor at the Faculty of Social Sciences at the University of Nottingham, Malaysia. Good evening. Welcome to the show. Now, as I understand it, you've researched suicide prevention through safe reporting practices, Wen Lee. Now, can you help? How has that previous research helped you understand the effects of the current COVID crisis on one's mental health?
Well, this is partly about the influence on media on our mental health, and it's well established in research that mass media has an effect on, expectations actually of our people around us and expectations of ourselves, almost indicating perceived standards for our way of life. And the media is powerful because it not only reflects public attitudes, but it also shapes them. And one important
aspect of suicide prevention is how information on mental health and indeed suicide prevention itself is disseminated on mass media. And in the area of interdisciplinary research that I do together with media academics and mental health practitioners is on the impact of media reports on suicide and why it's important that this is done in a safe manner. Now, it is rather worrying that there have already been reports of suicide taking place during this period. And this is where an important point needs to be made, which is that news reports on suicide can have the propensity to harm vulnerable persons. So by vulnerable persons, we're referring to persons who have lived experience of mental health conditions, which means they're more susceptible to attempts of suicide. Also persons who have been bereaved by suicide in the past.
Can I just get you to elaborate very quickly what you meant by safe practices? What do you mean by reporting on suicide in a safe manner?
Okay. Now, researchers studying what is termed copycat suicide behavior, right, or imitative suicide behavior, or a phenomenon also referred to as suicide contagion, have found that reports that sensationalize suicide, that show photos and details of the deceased, which have explicit references to the method of suicide and whether coverage is repeated on social media, on television and radio. Those are examples of unsafe practices, and they're associated with imitative suicide behavior. And how it happens is loosely based on social learning theory, learning through observation. Now, on the flip side of that, researchers have also found that there is a potential protective effect of safe reporting, where if a story concentrates on positive coping aspects and help-seeking and how this has helped a person who has had thoughts of suicide before, how it has helped them get out of that, it contributes to the prevention of suicide. And there is a term that researchers have come up for this, which is the Papageno effect. Papageno is the name of a character in Mozart's opera, The Magic Flute. He's a well-loved character. He's a bird catcher. And in the opera, he falls into despair, and at one point of time, he contemplates suicide, but he abandons the thought of suicide when he's shown by other characters of alternatives out of the situation that he was in. Yeah.
But,
so that's the Papageno effect.
Right, Wendy, this is Sharaad here. You know, is the problem just about news reports on suicides, or just the news in general? I mean, it's depressing enough to read, you know, endlessly, as most of us are doing, about the phenomena. Hundreds, thousands of people dying, you know, videos of mass burials. I mean, is that enough? I mean, to actually lead somebody into depression or into taking extreme physical harm against themselves? I mean, what would your advice be about that?
Well, so we were talking about suicide earlier on, so it's quite important for viewers to know that the causes of suicide are complex, and there is often no way to determine the exact causes of a particular person's suicide. It may never be known, and it doesn't have to be known, because what's more important is to stop it from being imitated by others. So in the context of the current pandemic, the World Health Organization, the WHO, has indeed recommended that because of the impacts of reading reports about people dying, etc., this information is continuously being streamed on social media and news sites, and it can lead to psychological reactions. And WHO actually recommends that you don't check, you can put down that handphone for a while and just check for news, just you know, twice a day, 2 designated times a day, to minimize watching, reading, listening to news on COVID-19 that causes stress, anxiety, and of course, quite importantly, to seek information only from trusted sources.
So to stop that scrolling and perhaps just check in at designated points during the day.
Absolutely.
Very quickly,
10
Wendy.
p.m. I'll consider this, yes.
Very quickly, Wendy, I want to know, you know, we spoke to the Befrienders KL just before we called into you. Where else would you recommend seeking help and support if you're feeling despondent and distressed with the current news cycle?
Well, the Befrienders are certainly a good resource. The Talian Cafe has counselors on duty, so they can be contacted as well. And there are also resources, for example, Mercy Malaysia via the Ministry of Health. And I believe the information is on the Ministry of Health's relevant websites. And Befrienders phone number is accessible throughout Malaysia. And there are other organizations such as Lifeline organization, and certain others, which some of these cater to Malay speakers, to Mandarin language speakers, and they don't just cater to English language speakers. And a good reference point would be official sources such as the MOH pages. And I do know of a site that my co-researchers, mental health practitioners, manage, which provides information in both English and Bahasa. It's called Laman Minda, one of many sources that are out there that provide useful information on how to manage one's mental health during this difficult situation.
Well, thank you so much for speaking with us tonight and sharing those leads with us, in case we want to find out more about getting help. Now, we're going to take a quick break, but after this, more on mental health in just a few minutes. Stay tuned to consider this. For staying with Sharaad and I on Consider This. COVID-19 has resulted in new stress triggers that may affect mental health. Everything from curtailed social interactions, the loss of normalcy, fear of death, as well as economic uncertainty. How do we deal with these anxieties as we learn to live in this new normal? Joining us on the line now, we have Visla Kumaresan, clinical psychologist. Welcome to the show, Visla. Thanks for joining us tonight. Now, what is it about the MCO that is putting increased emotional or psychological pressure on individuals, especially those who have already identified mental health issues?
Hi, Melisa. Thanks for having me on. Okay, so to answer the question, the MCO is stressful on multiple levels. First is, being stuck at home. At this point, it seems like it's fairly indefinite. People are not sure about things like work. Many people in Malaysia are, facing issues regarding food and income, and a whole bunch of other livelihood issues are affecting people. And then, of course, for those of us who have work, we have lost a sense of routine. Many of us rely on these external cues of when to start work, when to finish work, when do we eat, and those things are lost as well. And some of us are struggling to develop a routine by ourselves. Some of us are able to deal with it okay. But it does put a strain on the body and the mind. And it's even harder for people who already have diagnosis of mental health problems.
Yes, Visla, could you help us understand, for those people who already are diagnosed, who come to you, for instance, for help, how much more, are we pushing people, is this situation pushing people to the edge?
I don't know yet if it's the edge, but people are definitely finding it very difficult to deal with it, to cope. I think based on what we can see coming out of Wuhan, people in Wuhan they've been in lockdown for weeks, and many of them who were previously undiagnosed have now developed things like agoraphobia. They are afraid to come out of their homes. People who have developed anxiety and panic disorder, people who have developed obsessive-compulsive disorder because we are being fed this information that everything needs to be clean. We don't know where other people have been. We don't know what they have touched, what they haven't. So these are kinds of issues that are coming out of Wuhan. And also, of course, the social isolation is leading to things like depression.
Right.
And suicidality.
Visla, so based on that, based on what has been observed in Wuhan, if we can kind of extrapolate that here, are there early warning signs for us to prevent those anxieties from developing into a more serious mental health problem?
I think the best thing for people to do right now is to be mindful and watch themselves. Early signs would be, it's difficult to say for certain because a lot of people would describe this as very traumatic. So people are struggling with things like sleep. They never had issues before, but now sleep is an issue. that would be an important sign. Any effort to try and regulate sleep is not working. That might be a sign that you would need to talk to someone, for example, or call a counseling line. I understand that Befrienders have expanded their services during this time to call them and figure out what can be done to help yourself. The other thing that, would be a sign that you might need to start talking to someone. I'm not saying that you're going to develop a mental health problem, but you might need to talk to someone. You might need to reach out to someone. Is if you can't stop yourself from worrying. You ruminate. You think of worst-case scenarios. You find yourself imagining things that you recognize are not realistic, or it's not like you to fall into these kinds of patterns. You can't snap out of it.
Right.
Your usual coping mechanisms aren't working anymore. These would be the signs that people can look out for to actually start paying attention. If you can't talk to someone, a lot of people are struggling to do that even because there's no privacy to talk to someone. Yeah. Many people live in unsafe homes where there's a lot of suspicion when they are talking to someone on the phone. Go online, look for resources. The easiest thing people can do is actually start a thought journal and just start noting down the different things that you're thinking. Identify the ones that you think are unrealistic. Identify the worries that you think are reasonable, the ones that you can work with. For example, how are you going to pay rent?
Sure.
How are you going to sort out your finances over the next few months? Those would be the reasonable kinds of worries.
Thank you so much, Vizsla, for speaking with us tonight. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have on this episode of Consider This. But stay tuned. In just a couple of minutes, we have Notepad as our colleague Ibrahim Sani will continue the conversation on mental health, particularly financial stress as a trigger. I'm Melisa Idris, with me Sharaad Kuttan, signing off for this evening. Thank you so much for watching and good night.